on this. So we like to welcome everyone to our bee colony inspection and summer bee management. We program for today. It's our monthly virtual program. This is part of Unit 23, and we have a master naturalist, Hank Henderson, who's going to be joining us after Doug Gucker has a chance to talk. Again, we want to thank Doug for coming on today and Hank. They're going to give us some information. We targeted a lot of our local beekeepers so that you guys could get some information and ask some questions that you really need answered. Doug is a local food system and small farm extension educator with the University of Illinois Extension. He improves producer profitability and sustainability through demonstration and programming focused on using appropriate management strategies in all aspects of production. His work demonstrates practices in the area of farm management, soil health, nutrient management, and integrated pest management and grazing. Doug's other interests are in agriculture entrepreneurship, beekeeping, cover crops, native prairie restoration, water quality with regards to agriculture, urban farming systems, and local foods. His work experience includes agriculture technical service representative, small grains, and Illinois grain and livestock farmer. He's a natural resource and conservation agronomist. So we want to welcome Doug today, and we appreciate him. He serves DeWitt, Macon, and Piatt counties. So he's a little north of us. So he'll be able to work with us today on some of our strategies that we can use here. And again, our local master naturalist, Hank Henderson, is going to help us with some of our local questions. So thank you guys today for joining us, and we appreciate your time with joining us for our program. So Doug, I'll let you take over.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris. And I'm going to share my screen now.
Okay, and I'm going to pull this down.
And there we go. Okay, so I was asked to talk about early summer bee management, but there's also some other questions that I'm going to answer at the end that Chris gave me that were sent in. Right now, and this has been a problem, I shouldn't say right now, we've been battling this since the mid 2000s when it became recognized. The problem of bees are having a hard time surviving from one year to the next. We called it colony collapse disorder. There's been lots of research done, but as you can see, I tried, typically by this time of the year, they have the annual loss survey completed by Bee Informed. This year it still isn't done. I checked this morning in hopes that our 2020-21 season would be up so we would know. Last year we had high losses. Some of the highest losses we've seen since way back in 2012.
Hey, Doug, I'm sorry, could you make it a full screen? I'm seeing just a small screen.
Oh, is that all you're seeing is a small screen?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, wait just a minute.
Okay.
How's
Great.
that?
Awesome. Thank you.
How's that? Sorry about that. Okay, so so that's the issue. That's the issue that we beekeepers are dealing with, or is the fact that it's harder and harder to keep colonies alive. It's hard to keep colonies from one year to the next. It takes a lot of management. It can be done, but it's not like it was 30 years ago when you check the hive once a month, everything looked pretty good and life went on. Now it's far different. Here we go. So we need to be inspecting our hives weekly, at the very least every 2 weeks. We need to be checking to see if everything, how things look. We've got good brood pattern in there, whether we've got dwarf wing virus syndrome And that looks like this. That's these, that's from varroa mites. They bring this in. Is there a queen present? Do we have egg? Are we seeing eggs? How are the supers looking? Do you have 5 frames full on a super? Well, it's time to add a new super. We need to be monitoring for varroa mites, keeping those levels down to a tolerable level. And we have different ways we can do that. We can do miticides. We can break the brood cycle by caging the queen or making splits, because this interrupts the egg laying cycle. And as we'll see, that disrupts the varroa cycle tremendously. And this is the time of the year, well, it's spring, or early summer, is the time where you can catch swarms if you're lucky enough. When we're checking in our hive, now this is a spotty pattern here. We'd like to see something a little nicer than this. But once again, we want to check and see. But as you can see, looking at this slide, we've got larvae that are getting ready to cap. We have tiny larvae down in the bottom of this one. We have eggs up in these. So really, this looks pretty good, pretty good. They're beginning to form honey in the corners, which is what we typically see. And they're bringing in the pollen stores around the edges. So this is a new frame where the queen's been busy laying. Doesn't really look too bad. But once again, we want to be checking and seeing just how this is doing. And are the other frames, have they been totally sealed with the brood in them? This is really what we want to take a look at and see. And we want to check that week to week. If 1 week it looks good and 2 weeks later or a month later, you notice that the egg laying has decreased, well, that's a sign that maybe something has happened to your queen. She got injured. She may have run out of eggs. We don't know for sure, but that's just something we need to watch and be aware of. Once again, in July, it's basically the same thing. We want to be checking every week, 2 weeks at the latest, twice a month minimum. We need to be in our hives, looking at them, checking them. We need to be monitoring for varroa mites. I'll get into how we do that a little bit later. And once again, we can catch swarms because our wild colonies are, that's how they break the varroa cycle, is they swarm. Now the honeybees, we're in the population increase phase. We're nearing the peak. We'll be getting into the peak here in July as we run out of the bloom season. Our bloom season is kind of waning now. The spring trees have quit blooming. A lot of our flowers have quit blooming so profusely as they did in the spring. So our blooming season is beginning to slow down as we get into summer and the heat comes in. But as you notice here on the orange line, that's the mite population. It's still increasing, and it's going to be increasing all the way into September, where our bee populations will be declining by September. And this is where we have our issue, is not controlling these mites as we get later in the year and we have these tremendous population increases. So, and remember that a varroa mite on a bee would be similar to one of us, a human, having a tick the size of a softball. So these are huge. These are huge pests on these insects. And so we need to keep that in mind, that they really do sap the strength and vitality out of a colony. This comes from, once again, the best management practices for hive health. Um, and just to show some of the different things we can do, screen bottom boards, they do help some. They certainly aren't the cure-all. We thought they would be 20 years ago, but they do provide some help. As far as monitoring, really now it's the alcohol or sugar shakes is what we recommend now to use. I do the sugar shake personally, but the alcohol wash is even better. Um, the as well as a few other monitoring things. And we no longer recommend the use of the miticides Apistan and Checkmite because there is such widespread resistance among varroa mites to these two miticides. August, we continue the same thing, but we also need to be watching for diseases the whole time. You're seeing dead larvae. We seeing something that doesn't look right. As you can see, foul brood, the seal, the capped brood, they're sunken. They don't, this is not normal. Something's wrong. We need to be alert and be watching for this. Anything that's abnormal, we want to be proactive and take charge. Also, as we get into late summer, early September, August, September, it's maybe a good time to requeen before we get into the winter with a new strong queen. It comes out of the winter season. If the hive it survives, if we did a good job and the hive survived, then she'll begin laying eggs as soon as we get to the end of January and the days begin to get noticeably longer. That's a signal to start laying eggs so that she can start having a new colony of workers ready as the spring season begins. And always, we need to have good hive ventilation, summer and winter, to keep moisture down. Varroa mite. As you can see, here's what this poor bee has several on it. You can see a larvae in the background that has one on it. Not only do they suck fluids and nutrients out of the bee, but they also are a vector for disease. And this is the dwarf wing virus syndrome. We used to just call it dwarfed wing. We thought it was due to the mites feeding on the wings, and we now know it's actually a virus that causes this issue. But these bees can't fly, so they really, the hive dies. If you have a hive full of these bees, it dies because you have no foragers to come back to the hive to keep the hive full of pollen and nectar. A little bit about the varroa mite. The adult female, she walks into a cell where there's a growing bee pupa, and she likes to get in here a couple of days, just before the cell is capped. She waits till the pupa is of a pretty good size down there in the bottom of the cell. She comes in, hides on the side wall. The cell will then get capped. She's inside in a sealed cell, so very protected place for her to be. And she lays an egg after she's been in there a day and a half. And after she's in there 2.5 days, which basically she's just in there, that's resting period. Make sure that the bee cell is capped. And then after that, she lays an egg, one egg every 24 hours. And they really like to lay eggs in the drone cells because the drones take the longest amount of time to develop. Uh, and so that's 3 more days of egg laying. That's three more mite larvae that are going to hatch. And so this is why we do drone cells removal. Uh, if you have a nice, strong, healthy hive, you can use that as one of our methods of helping to cut down on varroa mites, because the varroa mite really likes drones because they are bigger and they take longer to grow, so they more young develop. And over time, these eggs hatch while the pupa is still developing. They mature inside, they mate, and they lay more eggs. So this cycle is just repeating inside this poor pupa cell. And so when the adult does emerge, it emerges with adult varroa mites as well as larvae. And so this is just a heck of an organism that is well adapted to bees that are kept in colonies. And like we do now, wild bees, because they swarm with more frequency, they break the brood cycle, the laying cycle, and that has been one of the ways that some of our wild colonies keep surviving from year to year. But once again, one of our biggest issues are these deformed wings on workers. Not only are these workers weakened because of the varroas feeding on them as they were developing, but they also can't fly. And just to emphasize that point, we're now in the critical point where we need to be really watching our hives, monitoring them for varroa mites. Not that you may need to treat right now, but checking those levels, because the population is going to continue to increase. And this is what we really want to stop. We want to stop that. We want to stop that mite population from increasing. So we can do that. I talked about this a little bit, visual inspection, but I'll tell you what, if when you're inspecting your hive and you see a varroa mite on one of your bees, you've got a problem. You need to be treating immediately, because there's a lot of mites in that hive. The other thing we do are the powdered sugar shake or the alcohol wash. Those are really two of our preferred methods now, according to the Honeybee Health Coalition. That's the group we really look to now for information. Sticky boards can be used. I do use sticky boards. I've got some coming next week. I just use them as just kind of a check to see how things are doing. They're kind of lots of crap from the hive lands on it. You'll see that if you use them. But if you notice a varroa mite on there, then it's time to do either the alcohol wash or the sugar shake, the sugar roll. And this is all kinds of information on how to do this step by step. This very helpful poster came from the bee lab of Dr. Spivak up at the University of Minnesota. She's now emeritus there. Her lab was responsible for developing one of our first hygienic bees developed in the United States. So they've been doing a lot of work on this up in Minnesota for a lot of years. Now then, the Honeybee Health Coalition Tools for Varroa Management. This guide not only covers varroa mites, which is our major concern to bee health right now, but it also covers all kinds of other health diseases as well and health issues. It's updated whenever there are new recommendations. Currently, the latest edition is the June 1st edition of 2018. And so this is really where you want to go for the most current recommendations. You can download it online. There's the web address up there. If you type in Honeybee Coalition, Health Coalition, it pops right up. I checked it again yesterday and the day before just to make sure there wasn't a newer edition coming in because they're about due for it. And they also give you the thresholds if you're using this is for either the alcohol wash or the powdered sugar roll, or as I call it, the sugar shake method of doing it. And as you can see, these levels are quite low. This is greater than 2 mites per 100 bees. And so for one of our washes, that would mean finding about over 6 mites because we typically sample roughly 300 bees when we do this. And so that's what we're looking for. These are low levels. We have to keep these at low levels because going into the winter, they can just devastate a hive. We have a variety of control products, even though I told you 2 things we really weren't recommending anymore, the Apostat and the mite check, because there is such, the mites have developed such resistance to both of these products nationwide. But we still have available the Apivar, as well as our essential oils products, our acid products, formic acid, oxalic acid, and the hops guard that's made from the beta acids from the hops plant. Those are all have shown to be effective. We also have our screen bottom board. The idea of sanitation can be the just removing comb that isn't good, has issues. Get rid of those things. Sanitation, any types of problems. Drone brood. Once again, if you got a big healthy hive, don't do this if you just put a new package in or you just have just caught you have a small hive. But if you have a big hive that's got full of bees, put in a drone cell because this will attract any varroa mites in the hive. You can then wait till it's sealed, remove it, freeze it, and then you'll kill anything that's on that drone brood. And that will then help to keep the mite load down within your colony without ever having to apply any type of chemical control, whether it's quote, a natural product with the essential oils or one of the acids. I already mentioned about brood interruption. That's the idea of swarming. We're just caging the queen for 2 weeks. It just disrupts that mite cycle. And if there are no no eggs being laid, no brood being raised, then there are no mites that are developing. And if you combine brood interruption with treatment, particularly if you have a high mite load, this can be quite effective in helping to suppressing the mite load in your colony. And then requeening with resistant stock. And we have lots of great queen breeders now in the state of Illinois, and particularly if we're wanting to requeen during the summer or late summer, we have a lot of good queen breeders here in Illinois, thanks to the Illinois Beekeepers Association and their queen initiative. But I showed you all those products, but we can only use those products, some of those products only at certain times of the year. When we're in the dormant phase, which is when we have no broods, such as during the winter time, something like that, then really we can do oxalic acid and we can use the hop guard. Those two are effective in cold temperatures. During the spring, a brood increase as the hives are increasing. We have a different level of products we can use. But once again, some of these can't be used if we have honey supers on. So once again, we've got to read and find out what product we can use at what time. Same way with population peak. If we have honey supers on, we can't really use our essential oil products in there. So we have to just kind of keep that in mind. But in the late summer, during the population decrease, after you've taken the honey off for harvesting, then we can put in those essential oil products for mite control. We can also do requeening. We can divide colonies if we have really big ones, or get them kind of equalized going into the winter. These are all things we can do. This is what a sticky board looks like. And it just slides under the screen board of your hive. And so in my case, I just basically tape it in place. You can put boards and slats under there. There's all kinds of things you could do. Works out well. Leave it 3 days, and then you give it a check. And if you find mites on there, then you have a really fast way of knowing that, okay, fine, I need to be in there and I need to be doing either an alcohol wash or a monitoring with a more predictive monitoring system, such as the alcohol wash or the powdered sugar roll. So it's really right now, our biggest thing is just watching the hives, making sure that we have a strong queen in there, that she's laying eggs. If you notice that she isn't, then it's time to order a queen. So hopefully you can get that done. Also watch, as I mentioned before, for those queen cells. That big cell that has an opening that towards the bottom, that's a large queen cell. That's a sign that you have a weak queen, or somehow you've lost your queen. And that when that queen, a new young queen, develops and flies out of the hive, she will come back. The workers and everything will be attracted to her, and then they will swarm. And so this is something that we need to watch even in the summertime, is that our queens stay nice and strong. And a new queen should be good for a year, maybe 2 years. You have to remember that when she takes her mating flight and she mates with those drones and is fertilized, they fertilize approximately 1 million to 2 million eggs, and that's what she lays for the rest of her life. So this is a pretty incredible little animal. So here are some of the topics that Chris kind of mentioned. I know Hank's going to go into swarm catching because he does that and he has some great videos of it. Only swarms I've caught have been mine trying to escape. How to combine hives. I'll just talk about the method that I use. Hank may have a method that he likes better or that works better for him. Every beekeeper has their own way of doing things or what works well for them. How long does it take to get honey from bees when they're put in a hive? For like with a package, you get a 3-pound package of bees. It takes the whole summer. Um, and you want to remove, if you're going to harvest the honey from those bees, you need to do that before the end of August, because the bees need to start make uh, pulling in for their winter stores. And so that will be either from flowers or from you providing sugar water. And I'll mention a little bit about that, the daily activities, particularly of the worker bee in the colony. And I'll mention about queens and drones as well. And then how do you keep them safe and alive over the winter? I will mention that as well. Um, Here's what a swarm may look like. It looks like just a huge hanging beard of bees. It is actually a pretty amazing thing to see. Um, it's a disappointing thing to see if it happens to be your package of bees that has left the hive, which is what this was. But that does happen. That does happen. But once again, you can remove these. For me, the way I've found when I've found swarms on trees or bushes is that I just cut the branches that are supporting uh, the swarm, particularly on a tree, and then I just put the whole swarm with a portion of the branch in there in a box, and I carry it back to the hive in a closed box, carry it back to the hive, uh, shake them into the hive, take my bee brush and brush them in. You need to get every single one in there, because at the very bottom of that, at the very top of that swarm is where the queen is. And so you have to get every single bee in the hive, because the queen may be the last bee on that branch or shrub or whatever they're attached to. So yeah, you have to get every single one. If you don't, as I've learned the hard way, if you don't get every single bee, they'll be back on that branch again in no time, because the queen is still there. You can also, they have swarm traps. This just happens to be one of the primary swarm traps that's sold, made out of wood pulp. Um, these can be bought, but they can also be made. You can go on the internet, you can make them out of 5-gallon buckets as well. The key thing with the swarm trap, and Hank's going to go into this more, is they're going to need to be baited with fresh comb, and possibly possibly putting a little bit of bee pheromone or bee lure in there, just to kind of attract them to check it out. Swarms, here's what a queen cell looks like. This is what you want to look for in your hive. They can be on the side of a frame, they can be on the bottom of the frame, they can be in the middle of comb. But the key thing to look for is this open cell that's pointed down. And right here we have 3. And this is a sign that the old queen is failing. And so they have converted a worker bee cell into a queen cell. And so those cells are going to be fed royal jelly, and a queen will develop. And the first queen the first queen to emerge will then kill the other 2 queens, so that she will be the dominant queen in that hive when she comes back from her fertilization flight. So that's what we want to look for. Swarming happens for overcrowding. If we haven't been checking our hives, they get too full. The bees know it's time to find a bigger place to go, and so they'll swarm and they will evacuate. They'll take all of them, but maybe a very few of the older ones they'll all be gone. And so you can lose a huge hive if you aren't doing a good job adding supers. When do you add a super? When you have 5 frames that are full or nearly full of honey, that's a signal that you should be putting another super on there to relieve that pressure. And sometimes if you have a really healthy hive, you can be putting supers on quite frequently during the peak time of the year. Requeening, when you notice these queen cells, this would be a time to see if you can find a queen real quick, because if you can then introduce her into the hive, and then you can remove these queen cells. Or if you want to try to raise a queen in a nuke, you can do that off to the side. Another way to stop queens, sometimes when you buy queens from a queen bee raiser, you can sometimes you can have as an additional service, not only will they be marked, can you have them marked, but you can have the wings clipped. And if the wings clip, the queen can't fly. So that basically means she can never swarm. There's pluses and minuses to that, but so some people think it's a good idea, some people don't. Currently, I don't have clipped queens, but I have in the past. The other thing you want to do is as we get towards the late summer, if you have multiple hives, get in there and see. You're going to have really strong hives. You may have weak hives. And so as we go into the winter season, we need to make some decisions about those weak hives. Are they going to be strong enough to make it through the winter? Should we maybe combine some weak hives together so that we can hopefully we'll have a one strong colony making it that will make it through the winter? And then we can make splits. If we have a really strong colony, this may be a great time to make a split, particularly if we're in the middle of the summer, uh, towards the decline as we're getting into August. There's still time for those splits to form nice strong colonies before winter sets in, particularly if we do supplemental feeding. So that's all something that we can do as well. Combining colonies, I use the newspaper method. It was something that I learned, and it works well. It works well for me. And basically what you do here is that if you have a colony that has a weak queen in it, is it really laying eggs or not laying eggs well for some reason? And sometimes that happens. Just isn't as fertile as you would have hoped she was going to be. You can put that weak colony on top of a strong colony. You can remove the queen if you can find her in there. She'll be the biggest bee in the box, and particularly the biggest bee on the brood cell. And remove her, set the weak colony on top of the strong colony, separate them by at least one sheet of newspaper. I was taught 3 sheets of newspaper, and then I make 3 slits with a knife in the paper, 1-inch slits. That way, a little bit of the strong pheromones from the queen, from the strong hive down below, they begin to waif, work their way, diffuse up into the weak colony above them. And in a matter of about 10 days to 2 weeks, the bees will chew through the paper and the 2 colonies will come together. And when you come back and check this, the only paper that's going to be left is what's on the outside rim and what was trapped between the hive boxes. So it's pretty amazing what they do. They're amazing little creatures. Uh, Somebody had a question about the life of a worker bee, the life of a bee. The worker bee has quite a life. Uh, they're all females, non-fertile females. Um, they spend their first 3 days after they emerge from their cell. They clean cells. Out to about day 12, from day 3 to day 12, they take care of rearing the young and serving the queen, supplying her with food, grooming. That's their task. When they get out around day 12 till day 20 for about the third week, second for about a week, they build comb. And so that's why we're showing the underside, this graphic showing the under side of the abdomen of the bee. That's where the wax glands are. And so they're building comb. They spend a few days before they become foragers as the guard bees at the entrance, making sure only bees from that colony come and go, that they're also that other insects, because once again, there's honey in there. So there's lots of things that want to come inside that hive. They protect it. They keep wax moths out. They're the sentries at the guard posts. They're to only let in what's supposed to come in. And then finally, for the last 3 weeks of their life, they are foragers. And why do they only do it for 3 weeks, 20 plus days? Because their wings wear out. Flying back and forth foraging, their wings get tattered and torn, and eventually there becomes a time when they don't make it back to the hive. And so they just wear out and die. Now, what's the life of a queen? Her entire life is spent, hopefully, inside the hive, not swarming, inside the hive, laying eggs, and she is, and creating pheromone. She is creating that colony. They come from her. The drone, on the other hand, all the male drones do is they fly out to the drone mating area, and they wait to fertilize a new queen who flies out to one of these drone mating areas, and they'll be about a mile or a mile and a half away from the colony. Drones, they're necessary, but drones have to be fed by the worker bees. They're kicked out of the colony as we get into the fall, particularly when the weather gets real cold. The worker bees don't toss, but they don't let the drones re-enter the hive because they're a drain on the food supply. And so the drone has a pretty good life, but the drone doesn't go through the winter time. And that's pretty much the life of bees. Now, preparing for winter. As we get to the end of August, we need to turn our focus to, first of all, is there enough honey in the hive? Or are you going to harvest any honey out of your hive? That's when you need to be making that decision before the 1st of September. Once again, in September, we need to be inspecting it at least every 2 weeks, not once a month. We need to be in September really keeping a close eye on it. We need to be monitoring those varroa mites. Once again, this is the peak time that we're going of the mite population kind of reaching its upper bounds. So we want to really keep that mite load down. And once again, we want 3 bees or less per 100 bees. And so we have to work hard at that. We also want to go into the winter with at least 70 to 80 pounds of honey in there, or 1 deep's worth. Those are the 9 3/4 inch thick frames, not the mediums, the honey supers. So you want to go in with that much, and if you don't use deeps and you use only mediums, I'm old now, so I no longer use deeps. I strictly use mediums. I go into the winter with 2 mediums worth of honey in there. And in the fall, we're going to probably need, unless you're fortunate, depending where you live. I live up here on the prairie and corn and soybean country, and so we really have very little fall forage for the bees to forage on. We have some goldenrod, but not near enough, and so I have to feed sugar water to make sure I get up to something close to what those bees need to get through the winter time. And once again, it's this whole idea. We need to be checking for our weak colonies. We need to be remembering, particularly to control mites. We've got to get them controlled before winter. That is just so important. And then the rest of the fall is just basically the same thing. But once again, we just need to remember, we need to we need to go into the winter with that hive heavy. When you try to tilt that hive, it feels heavy. We need to have plenty of honey in there for those bees that they can get to. And it needs to be above where they are, not below them. It needs to be above where they are. The other thing is that finally, as we just get into the coldest, as it really starts getting cold, particularly the end of October into November, we need to make sure we've reduced the entrance because we're only going to have bees probably taking just cleansing flights as it gets colder, as our temperatures drop down to 50 degrees and less, and there's less and less to forage for. We're probably doing more feeding inside of the hive than outside of the hive. And then finally, in the winter time, I have started over the past few years, and I've found it has made a difference. I do use candy. I do dry feeding in the winter time. Sometimes we've had these warm breaks here lately. It seems like the past couple winters we've had warm weather breaks either in December or January, and the bees get quite active and they consume quite a bit of the honey. And so they're out of food, and then it turns off bitterly cold again. So I make a candy board. You can find recipes for these online. You can take a piece of newspaper, fold it, put it across the top of your frames, and dump a bag of sugar on there. They just need food. They don't need water. They need food. They need sugars and proteins. And so this is what I found, and it is working. Here, this is just a picture of my candy boards. I make them on a baking sheet, and the baking sheet isn't the size of my hive boxes, so I break it up so I can put it in there, and that works quite well. And it is gotten my hives through the past few winters. So I can't say enough for winter feeding and making sure your bees have enough food going into the fall, and that you've controlled the mites before we get to winter. It's just absolutely necessary anymore. So that's about it. And I just wanted to mention Bee Blitz. It's this Saturday. You can go to that website, beespotter.org/beeblitz. It's real simple to do. Even if you don't have a hive of bees, you take a camera, snap a picture of a bee on a flower. And this could be a bumblebee, one of our many native bees, or a honeybee. And by doing that, they will then identify it, and then they're logging to kind of keep track of how our native and honeybee populations are doing here in Illinois, as well as in the states of Indiana, Missouri, and Ohio. And actually, the University of Illinois Department of Entomology and Mathematics are the ones that are responsible for doing this. And so it's a great project. We encourage it with our master naturalists here in the unit that I work out of. So I said a whole lot of things. I barely took a breath for the last 45 minutes, but I just want you to be successful. And if you're selling honey, be profitable. You have any questions?
Doug,
You can,
Tammy had said that she has added, she has one hive, but she is getting to the third super right now. So she's adding those supers. And then she says here, is there a cutoff for doing a split?
Actually, the main thing is to do a split. And Hank, you can chime in since you have 25 hives, and I'm just a hobbyist. For me, I have to have I'm a nervous beekeeper, so I want a really strong hive, and so 3 supers, I wouldn't be doing a split. It would be more if I had 5 or 6 supers on there, and I just had all these bees. And if I was also beginning to notice that I was picking up some queen cells occasionally down in the hive when I would do a deeper inspection of the hive, if I was picking up any queen cells, then that would be a clue that, okay, let's do a split. Let's do a split. We've got a colony here that's wanting to do something. What do you think, Hank?
I think I would add to that I've heard a lot of beekeepers recently talking about doing splits in the spring to try to avoid swarms. But I think you're right. I do not do splits, and but somebody was like you talked about with that size of a hive going on, I would just let it keep growing and try to get it as strong as you can.
Yep. Any other questions for me?
There was one more, and then we'll let Hank kind of take over if you want. Tammy also said, I've heard it's best to split before the summer solstice. Is that correct? Which would have been what, June 20th? So do you have a preference on that before June 20th or not, the summer solstice?
Well, once again, going along with what Hank said, if you've got a really strong hive in the spring, then yeah, that wouldn't be a bad idea. But once again, that's a really strong hive. And so that would be a hive where you've already, by the summer solstice this week, you've got many supers on top of it. This isn't going to be something where you just now have put your third super on there. This is going to be one where you're going, oh my gosh, I've already got 4 supers on top. I'm getting ready to put the 5th on there. These bees are going crazy. Then yes, that would be something. And I've only had one hive like that in my nearly 30 years of doing this. And
yeah,
so,
I haven't either, Doug. So that would be some crazy bee honey production going on. Yeah, and I would reiterate that when the splits that I hear people talk about, they're doing it in May. They're doing it, whenever the weather warmed up, and they have strong hives that came out of the winter strong, and they're trying to avoid swarms, and or just purposely grow their bee yard with some more colonies. So some point you can make that decision in May, early in May, that you have a really strong hive. And then, because then you've got other decisions with your splitting. Are you going to let them raise their own queen? Are you going to buy a queen? And some other experienced beekeepers can raise their own queens and they'll keep a handful of queens going, and they're juggling queens and splits, and they're moving frames of brood around, and real complicated. That's too complicated for me. So I am a real amateur, and I don't really feel like messing with the bees to mess with their life cycle and remove their brood and do that. So I can't comment on having any experience with that. I have a guy that I get a lot of bee equipment from. I always get a lot of education from him. I trade swarms for equipment with him, and he does all this stuff. He fools around with all of this, and he's splitting, and he's raising queens, and he's moving things around. So it's very interesting to talk about it, and a little bit scary for me to think about doing it. So, a confession.
We're ready for the next question.
She said, thank you.
Okay.
Hey, and Doug, I'd ask you, since you know a lot about honey production, that if I had a hive, I guess I've been extracting honey earlier these last few years, and what drove me to start thinking about it was hive beetles getting into the honey. And so along those theories, if I had a bunch of supers getting full of honey, I would be taking them off instead of just still stacking them up. And I would put another one on there, definitely, but I would take one off and put one on and be extracting that honey, because hive beetles have a way of getting into the honey. And so I would rather take it off than having just a full box of honey just sitting there. And I see that they haven't been capped yet. Yeah, so keep an eye on that. I've been pulling honey these last 2 or 3 weeks, and the same thing, I kind of go through. This is a new kind of thing I'm doing. I'm taking frames of honey that are capped, and I have extracted honey. So I'll have a frame with me that's fresh. It's got honey in it that I've extracted, and I just put that back into the box. So I might go in and take those 5 full frames of honey. All right, good. And is that working for you okay, Tammy? I'm kind of wondering, I hope I'm not disrupting the cycle of the bees, but I put one, instead of sitting the frames out in the yard to be cleaned up by all the bees, I put it right back in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we did last year. We got a really great harvest of honey in the spring, some spring honey. And that's what we did. We spun it out, put it back in, and let them go to town, and saved them a lot of time because they just packed it full again. So,
well, I'm glad to hear that. That's
which is the way you get to sell spring honey that way, because you got it separated out. So you got that nice light honey that lots of people like. And then you can sell your summer darker honey later.
we did that too. Yep.
And Tammy, another kind of benefit I've learned over the years, when I would do my extraction, kind of more traditional time later, and then I'd put the frames out in the yard to be cleaned up, and I learned the hard way to bring them back in just, late. And I thought right before dark, but it just was out there too late, and I had wax moths.
Yeah.
And I'd be putting away my boxes for the winter with them all cleaned up, and I'd have those darn wax moths in there. And, come spring, you'd open them up, even though I tried to close them tight and everything, and I would have a big mess with wax moths. So I'm hoping this is another way to avoid that. Plus, I've also started using more tote boxes and just putting my frames in there.
We do that too. We keep them in our basement. We've had issues with wax moths. They just get in there no matter what, and they're so messy. It gets ugly. So, yep.
And I get in trouble when I'm putting a bunch of frames in the freezer in the basement. my wife's like, okay, now you got the freezer full. Try to kill off for everybody on there. Like the wax moths make a huge mess and can basically just destroy your nice drawn out frames of wax foundation. And if you catch it early enough, you can freeze them and kill off. In the winter time, it's going to freeze them off too, but they've already done their dirty deeds.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
I find for anybody that's interested in becoming a beekeeper, it's tough the first couple of years because you're just getting started. It's a little complicated to know what's going on. And the hardest thing I found is getting the wax built, right? Because that's the foundation for everything. So I would just say, you know, if you can get some wax, some frames of wax drawn out, you know, don't expect much the first year, but the second and third year, this is our 5th year now. We have 7 hives right now. And, you know, it just takes a while to get that comb all drawn out so that they can, you know, pack it full of honey. But I did run into somebody who was a novice and hadn't taken any beekeeping classes. And when I ran into her, she was telling me that her bees had died and that she had taken all her frames over to the car wash and washed off all the wax so she could start fresh the next year. And I just covered my eyes.
yeah,
I couldn't believe it because that was like the gold of the hive, right? Yeah.
that is the goal. Yeah, I find myself more and more like balancing out, drawn out frames. You know, when I'm putting new boxes, I'll try to have.
Yep.
I'll be counting how many I have left of drawn out wax to try to have some in every box. I think for the
give them a little start.
Track them.
Yep. It helps if you can put a few frames, you know, when you're expanding and building new hives. It helps to give them a little bit of something to lay in and something to start working with instead of just all foundation. It just makes it a lot easier.
And I agree with you on your experience on getting honey. And I saw that one of the questions of a registrant that when can they get honey? And I would say, you know, never expect it the first year is a pretty general thing. And then by the second year, yeah, you can probably get some honey. And it is so cool to get your first honey. It's very exciting. Even if you just get a frame, maybe take some honey, but that's a lot of fun.
Doug, there was one question that they asked if you will have downloadable slides. Will you share your slides with us that they can print and be able to use those?
Yes, and I will send those to you, Chris.
Okay. And I will send everyone a link with those, and also the link we are recording. So this will be on our YouTube channel, and we'll share that link with you also. Hank, is there anything that you want to share with the group before we break for today? Is there any videos you want to share of the swarm?
I have that one video, and I was just going to say, hey, Doug, I really appreciated what you did because I didn't know like the life of a bee. I didn't realize they had different jobs in their life. And maybe I've been influenced by that Bee movie from 20 years ago, where they had to pick their job. But I found that really interesting that they actually move and change their jobs and they get older before they start foraging. That must have been some pretty wild research to figure that out.
Well, this colony collapse disorder, there's been a lot of bee experts spending lots of time trying to figure out what is going on out there, and part of it was they figured out that worker bees, they aren't as specialized. They basically work go through the different steps, working their way up to the ultimate job of being a forager.
All right, Chris, how do I do the video if I see share screen, but it just says
you should be able to share your screen. Let me see. I have you as a host.
Let's see here.
I'll make you host along with, so that way now you can possibly do it easier.
Okay. All right. All right. And so for those that are still on here, Doug talked about capturing swarms, and in my experiences, because I have enough hives, I just do these walks around, like starting in April when it's warming up through May, I just walk out there every day, a couple times a day, look on sunny days looking for swarms. And so I'm usually probably catching my own bees or my neighbors, and I walk around their yards with their permission. And so one day, a couple years ago, I had this really big swarm, and I set up my camera and I took this little video I'm going to show. Can y'all see that? I think.
Yes, I see it.
So this was a plum tree that's just weighted down with about, I don't know, 7 or 8 pounds of bees. And I was struggling to figure out how to get my box under this thing. I usually would shake this kind of thing right into the box, but it was more than I could fit in this box. So like when Doug said, you want to get every bee, you can see the bees all flying around here. And in all those clumps of bees, I've hoped I've got the queen. And I've set this box down on the ground, and all these bees are trying to figure out, where is the queen right now? Is she still in that tree? Is she in the box? They start trying to sort themselves out. And let's see here. And what I usually do is I put a white sheet on the ground. It's kind of a little target zone. But if you look kind of close, you'll see the general direction of these bees going into the box. There's a hole in the bottom of the box, a little front door, and I've left the lid open on top. And that is a very good sign that the queen was in that box, and everybody has decided it's time to march in there. So that was a little video of catching a big old swarm. Most times they're a lot smaller than that. And if you're lucky, they're on one little branch and you can just shake it right into a little box. Or like Doug said, I've had some lately where we snipped a piece of tree limb and just carried that right over to a new colony setting up, which is very convenient. Once you catch them in a box, you got to turn around and dump that into a box. But over the years, I've done a lot of that. I've got what I call my trusty swarm box right here, and I kind of document on there lots of swarms I've caught over the years. I kind of write it down here, and for most of the box swarms, that's probably a good size for that. And that's how I replenish. Doug started talking about having losses of bee colonies, and that's what when I come out of the winter. And luckily, the last couple of years, I had about 20% losses, a little bit under the average. But I'll replenish that or grow my hobby by catching those swarms. So, any questions about swarms? All right.
That white sheet was a nice technique. I'm going to use that, Hank. That's quite helpful. They give you an idea whether the queen's in the box or not.
Yeah, that was my wife's idea years ago. And after shaking them into the wet grass, and the bees are struggling, but with a sheet under there, they really can line up, and you can watch them march in there, and it kind of keeps them, I'll just say, it makes it a little easier for them.
Well, I don't see any more questions. I appreciate you guys' time today and everybody joining us for our session. Does anybody have any last questions? All right, I had to show Hank because last time he influenced us. Look, I have our Be Happy is my shirt on today.
I like it.
Hank had his shirts on earlier. So for Pollinator Week, I had to wear my shirt for show Hank or Bee
I
shirt.
liked it. I liked it. And my bees would love that background of yours too.
I know. Well, I tend to see a lot of carpenter bees on the larkspur, more than even our honeybees. I was telling Doug, I have white clover blooming right now and some red, and they're really enjoying that white clover.
Yeah.
Well, Doug, thank you. Hank, thank you for your time today. Does anybody have any further questions before we let them go today?
All right.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We appreciate
Thank you.
it. See ya.